All right. Oh, yes, there we are. Good morning. My name is DJ Eshelman, and this is the 11 Talents broadcast. 11 Talents. Interesting concept. Parable of the Talents is something that I've known for a long time and always been puzzled by. And so I decided that I needed to expand my knowledge of that during a fast one year and did just that and found some things about that parable that were very fascinating. It's a parable that's told sort of twice. There's a account in Matthew that is the one that most commonly gets known, but there's a similar one in Luke that is talking about instead of talents, it's a servant that or a prince that goes away and has enemies and a little bit of a different story, but the point of them both is pretty much the same. One of the things that I've always struggled with that is that that notion of not doing work or not doing somebody else's work um, being evil is what that the whole point of the person that was given one talent. In other words, somebody that the master knew was not really up to the task, and but gave one of the talents to anyway, which is always fascinating to me. But this person was thrown out because they didn't really obey, and that's actually what I wanted to hone in on today is obedience. And I've been hearing from a lot of people that they feel a, a call towards fasting. And I just realized something that I need to change to, and I apologize. So yeah, there we go. Sorry. My apologies. This is live broadcast, folks. Sometimes it's not ideal, but a lot of people that I've been talking to over the past, well, I would say, few months actually, have expressed that they feel a call towards fasting. And we had a short period of a lot of people doing that in January. And I felt good about doing that. That was something that I felt was a good thing to do, and it actually led to some really big things happening in my life. But one of the things that came out of that in having all these conversations and leading a small group of people through that was, we don't know how to fast. Or I shouldn't say we, like all of them did, but many people have told me that. Many people tell me that they are concerned about fasting, that they feel that it's going to be, miserable, and that there's no reason to put themselves through that and that sort of thing. So the answer to that question is, well, yeah, yeah. There's not it's not a normal activity to do fasting, right? It's not something that you normally would do. So yeah, anytime you do something like that, there's going to be discomfort. But the thing is that discomfort is the point. So I looked through the Bible a little bit, and I don't want to say I say a little bit because I don't want to say that I've done a definitive study on this by any stretch. But what I've found is that fasting is something that is done in a variety of different ways. And there are some times that fasting is a suffering, that it is something where, um, uh, me? Okay, my bad. Sorry about that. Something came up and I realized it was not correct. And so I needed to correct that before it got out to anyone else. But in any case, wow, that was a classic squirrel moment. I guess I need my half decaf, half regular coffee. I'm tapering down, which is something we're going to be talking about very shortly here. But suffering is something that comes up a lot when it comes to people thinking about fasting, and so they seem to think that maybe it's a purposeful suffering. You're making yourself suffer, making yourself miserable, and somehow on the other end of that, God is happy. Stop and think about your suffering makes God happy? That's not right, right? Yeah, that can't be correct. Now, I have had times where I have been called to fast because I have been disobedient or not. Uh, there's kind of the willful ignorance. There is, not knowing about something, and then there's just straight doing things that are bad, and they're bad, and you do them anyway. And there's been times in my life where I have done just that, done things that were bad, and I knew it. I knew it at the time. I probably knew it while I was doing it, but there's been times where I felt the need to, obviously repent, but there was something more that needed to happen there, and in those times, God, there's been like one or two times. I don't think it's been like a huge amount of times in my life, but God has led me towards fasting, not as a punishment as such. That's something that is always frustrating to hear people talking about God punishing us. That's not really the full picture. Sometimes we need physical examples in our body to learn lessons that are important to us, right? So fasting for punishment is something that is not necessarily because just to do your time and move on. It's to spend some time reflecting on whatever it was that was bad and how the results of that sort of thing, and looking into that more fully and understanding fully that uh, it's not appropriate, that sort of thing. But what lessons can you learn from it, and how can you adapt, and how can you recommit? And it's just a few of the things that fasting for, because you've been led towards that is important. Most people though feel for fasting because they feel they don't actually. I would say that the majority of people that I've talked to that have felt a call towards fasting really sure why. They don't know why they feel this pull towards fasting. And I would put myself into that camp. There are times where I purposely will fast because I want to go to God with something, and I need to focus as much as I can. And I know that there's a focus that comes with fasting, that that taking away sustenance and just setting apart time and making every action purposeful at that point. There's something to that really helps. And so there are times where it's more intercessory. It's more of me wanting to approach God with a problem or a need. Or sometimes there's been times of fasting because I'm worried about someone else. And so it's something that is I yeah, I think I can say this appropriately. It's in the toolbox. It's something that we can feel free to do. We're not called to only fast when we feel it's appropriate to do so, or whatever, or that the a group is doing it. Like Lent is going on right now, which is why we're talking about fasting. But that's not the only times we can do that. That we have to do that. That sort of thing. It's not. You look for examples in the Bible, you're not going to find any. What you are going to find is a lot of people that talk about fasting being part of their habit. In other words, it was normal. There are a lot of uh, actually, there's several examples of some religious sects that were present in Jesus' time that were actually fasting as a habit, but they were doing it more as a show, and so we want to avoid that, obviously. But it's clear that there was a habit there, and a lot of those folks were either doing what we would call intermittent fasting today, where they would just go without food for, you know, 24 hours or a length of time, 12 hours, whatever it might be. And so there's an intermittent style of fasting. And so they are able to say that they've fasted this week and do that every week. And that's just kind of brownie points, you know. So when it comes to that, I don't want your fasting to be brownie points. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't help anyone. God is not impressed with your your doing things just to check a box. But when it comes to obedience, there is something important to know about this. And that is that when God is calling you towards fasting, it is actually really important for you to obey. It is not just important to check a box. It's because there's something on the other side. You know, when you're called to fasting, it's usually called out of a noisy place, out of a place of a lot of stress and things like that. And that stress doesn't go away just because you start a fast, right? Or just it's not like some magical thing. It's like you stop eating some foods and or stop drinking coffee or whatever your fast is going to entail, and all of a sudden your stresses go away. That's not the way this works. But that purposeful focus has a purpose to it. And simple obedience is not just the only thing. However, what I find is that one of the most simple ways to obey is in our bodies. And so fasting is a symbol of that, of saying, okay, I am exercising faith, first off, that I've been designed such that I can go without and I'm going to be okay. My body is sitting there trying to tell me otherwise, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, I think, if we have time. But I know better. I know that God's design for my body allows me to do this without, you know, ceasing to function. Two, I know that this act is focusing me, and it's a anchor point. And so that's really the point of obedience, is to take those things in your body and say, you know, this is more powerful. You know, the the brain we've been created with is far more capable of, well, literally, in our sense, just forming reality, and that's what it is. That's let's call it exactly what it is. But the difference in regards to that, um, as far as obedience versus just doing it because you feel like you should, or maybe just instead of feeling like you want a specific result and you're doing that for that result, you're doing it just for obedience. It doesn't necessarily mean you want to do a fast, but you feel called to that. Um, and oftentimes it's hard to resist that call. If you try and run from it, it just gets worse. If that's the sort of thing you're going through, then yeah, fasting's for you. So let's get on to some of the more mechanics of this, because this is something we're walking through right now, and I'm in the process of writing this book, and so it's on my mind. But let's walk this through again, because like I said, I hear these objections all the time of, well, I can't fast because X, and if your reasons are medical in nature, then obviously I want you to seek medical advice. Don't take medical advice from me. I am not qualified to give that. And so whether it's a any modifications to your diet, if you have conditions that involve you um, taking medications, that are diet specific, sort of like diabetes, for example, then yeah, you should absolutely consult a medical professional. My advice, though, is to take them a plan and say, "This is my plan. Do I need to modify this at all?" And be specific about that. And so that's one of the things that I'm in the process of outlining in the book itself. And I was hoping that I had the link here, and I don't. It's unfortunately right now too complicated to bring up. So you're going to have to just uh, make a comment if you want to get a link to that, or I will try and put it in here afterwards. I'll try to remember to do that. Um, so you can actually participate in that. But in the book, one of the things that I've done is I've actually lined out an overall plan. Going to get into more detail on that at some point, I'm sure, but um, there are ways that I've found to do fasting that are easier on the body and that are approachable. When we just shut ourselves down and say, nope, I can't do that. I can't fast. I have high blood pressure. I can't fast. Well, that's probably not true. Again, I'm not a medical professional. Don't take my advice on this, but I'm just saying challenge your notions on this. Challenge your limitations. That's really the whole point of fasting, is to challenge your limitations. And honestly, when it comes to fasting, a lot of people take this to extremes just because, again, there's those examples in the Bible of, people putting on sackcloth and just wallowing in misery. That was their fasting. Usually that's in mourning or because they've done something very, very bad. Um, the people of Nineveh, for example, were about to be destroyed. So everyone was called to fast, and everyone did hard. They fasted so hard, uh, and God spared them. That intercession worked. It's real. Jonah threw a hissy fit, but it was real, and that transformation was given. In fact, my pastor pointed out this Sunday that Nineveh went on to be a region that has long flourished. Um, but yeah, that's another thing for another day. But there's a generational blessing that occurred there. So very cool stuff. In fact, Jesus talks about that in the something I shared earlier this week, a song I called "The Sign of Jonah," that Jesus talks about. A wicked generation asks for a sign, but it will get none except for the sign of Jonah. And people look at that and say, "Oh, okay, yeah, Jonah's in the whale." But to me, it's almost like the sign of Nineveh, actually. That there was a repentance from an entire generation, and that generation went on to be blessed. And so that's what I see that as. But the fasting element is part of that. But that was a digression, and yeah, that's why it's scheduled this for an hour. It's gonna happen, folks. Strap yourselves in, get something. Uh, well, depending on where you're at, cool or warm. I actually kind of regret having a warm beverage. It's already 74 degrees in my office, so we'll see how this goes. However, the the thing about suffering and fasting and things like that is usually because you don't have the knowledge. Knowledge is power here. So if you're thinking of fasting is only I have to, only drink water for 40 days in the desert. Yeah, that's a little extreme. I've never done that. I have done, I believe the most I've done is 14 days of only water. That's the longest I've gone. And now I was fully prepared to go even longer. I was asking God about that my last time I was doing that. Is like, should this be longer? And God said, no, you're great, man. So it was one of those kind of conversations. I love those conversations with God. But the reality is that fasting is really just going without something. And for some, during Lent, they're giving up things, and it's hard to call that fasting per se, but at its core, that's what fasting really is having something you normally would have taken away for a period of time and living with that. Now, with fasting, in order to be significant, it really needs to be a challenge. It needs to raise your level of discomfort pretty substantially. I often call this living in as in living in uncomfort. You've taken comfort away. It is uncomfortable. This is something that's a core of the fasting experience. It's not comfortable. It's not normal. Your body is freaking out. Your body is freaking out, by the way, because you've trained it to do so. Say that again. Your body is freaking out during fasting because you've trained it to do so. Um, and this is actually a big, 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 huge piece of what I've discovered over the years of how to be not just successful in fasting, as in getting through your whole plan, which sometimes is a challenge. I will admit that there have been times where of fasting where I've had to, I felt the need to modify my plan, and in those times, I can honestly say that I didn't prepare well enough. And so that is something that, as part of our 40 days process, 10 of those days is preparing for the fast. Now, there's a component of mental preparation, getting yourself mentally ready for the challenge. Because I don't believe in surprising people. I don't believe, here, let me put this on the screen because I say this all the time and it's so true. I think I say this every day because it is just that important. And that is that you will not rise to the occasion. You'll only rise to your level of preparedness. So when it comes to things like fasting, what that means is that you will, if you try and just go full on into like, you know, only drinking water for 3 weeks or whatever it is, the reality is that you will probably fail if you go straight into that. Your mental discipline is probably not strong enough to overcome the physical part of that. Your physical body will be overwhelmed. And that actually is true from a physical standpoint as well. You might find that your physical body cannot react that fast to drastic changes like that. And so for me, one of the times I attempted that, I I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but it was one of those kind of Fat Tuesday scenarios where, well, I'm gonna be doing this for whatever length of time it was. I think at the time, like um, 2 weeks or whatever, and so I'm not gonna be able to enjoy these other things, and so I'm just gonna indulge in all these things and just get it out of my system, kind of thing. Well, I just realized I should have put this into the chapter I just wrote, but um, when you do that, you're not getting it out of your system. You're getting it into your system. You're programming your body as to what it should be expecting. If you eat a bunch of sugar, there's a glycemic response that happens in your body, right? If you eat sugary foods or even things like orange juice or rice or things like that, it's going to spike that level of uh, glucose in your blood, and so that spike then is followed with a drop and usually goes below a baseline. And that below a baseline is your body starting to freak out and saying, whoa, what happened to what we had? And it wants you to have more of that, right? So, and again, I'll just put this up there. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional of any kind. This is just my research. This is actually fully available online. This is uh, actually there's a glycemic index that has been created by Harvard Medical that is kind of the reference on these kind of things that kind of tell you some foods that do this, that have this spike response. Well, in my experience, what happened to me was that that dip was followed by an even bigger dip in a crisis of everything being taken away all of a sudden. And um, a lot of things happened. I kind of I was feeling really miserable, so I decided to take a nice hot bath. Turned out that was a very horrible idea because my blood pressure dropped, and I wasn't on any medications at this point. But it was one of those things where it was drastic enough to where I almost passed out in the tub. Almost had a headline: "Man dies while fasting." It's like what I could have drowned, and yeah, so it's one of those things where it's just like I don't want you to take this flippantly, but at the same time, I want you to be prepared mentally, physically, but also spiritually for a fast. And so, taking that 10 days is part of our process. That's what I walk you through. So it's basically what to expect, and being very upfront about that, and not waiting for the moment to say, "Surprise, you're gonna be miserable," "Surprise, you're not gonna have any energy," "Surprise, you're gonna have headaches." I don't wanna do that. I wanna say, "You know what? Your obedience comes with a cost. Your obedience comes with the cost of these physical things that are gonna happen." But that being said, there's nothing in scripture anywhere I found that says we are required to do fasting a certain way. Our obedience does not mean suffering. Maybe I should just call that the title of the book. Obedience does not mean suffering. It's just like this is not the way this is. Fasting is not suffering. Um, it's difficult. Yes, there are moments that feel like suffering. Yes, but it's not the point. But that's something to get across, though, is that especially following the plan that I have, there will be some severe moments of uncomfort. It's going to happen. Um, Largely because there are, I apologize. There are elements of life that, there we go. Well, I should say of our modern life, our modern diets, our modern bodies, and things like that hit us harder, and so we need to be prepared. We need to know what's coming, and so having a progressively tiered approach to fasting is what I call this, is of saying, okay, if I'm up here, especially from a glycemic index point, you know, I need to get down to here. Whereas here, well, that's going to depend from person to person. Um, the way I challenge people is to plan on 3 days of water only, um, and that's kind of a common thing you see in the Bible. People taking 3 days of only water. Very common reference to a fast for various reasons. Some of which were for healing, some of which were repentance, some of which were just for clarity. It really depends on their reasons, but the mechanics were pretty commonly three. Now there's other examples, but that was one of those things. And so that is a point of focus and a point of challenge to get to that point. But what I've found is that if you progressively lower your body's intake and be strategic about what you're taking in during that time of ramping down to that point, then you're much more likely to be successful. And I say this from a point of confidence, having done it several times, having guided my wife through it, and some others as well. There's a level of confidence that I have in this, that it's possible. But if you don't take that time to mentally prepare and get your mind ready to overcome the body, it's not just going to magically happen just because you've been obedient. That's not, just doing the thing is not what the obedience of fasting is. You know, Staying with the thing is. And so it's not just, I fasted for a day, I get credit for that. We're not saying that. We're saying we're committing to a process. And so for us, it's a 20-day process that we're going through. And so it is going to be a period of ramping down and just taking things away, daily, and getting your bodies to the point where they can actually, handle being water only. Because like I said, our modern diets really don't help. They don't do our bodies any favors. Um, and so just like, I don't want to go through the entire detail here. Not in this forum. It's not really an appropriate um, place to do that right now, just because this is very much in development, and I don't have the right kind of gates in place to make sure that people are like I said, taking that that medical advice first. But to give you an overlay of what this looks like, is you are choosing some things that are you're going to be taking away the first few days that are going to help you with your focus, help you with, headaches and aches and things like that tend to happen when I drink a lot of coffee, for example. And so part of my tapering down to removing coffee altogether, which actually is the first hurdle, that's actually the first thing I usually ask people to give up is caffeine. Um, because that when you remove caffeine, if you've had any caffeine in your system, there's going to be some level of headache that happens when you remove that caffeine. That's why we know it as an addictive substance, basically, because it has that response when you take it away. And so anytime that has a physical response when you take something away, we call that an addiction. So that's whatever. But taking away coffee is a first hurdle because it'll start giving you those headaches. Well, if what you don't want to do is compound those headaches with everything else. A lot of people just think to themselves, gosh, if I'm just going to, I know I'm going to start suffering, so I might as well just bring it all on at once and just get it over with. Well, there's an intensity that comes with that. And I say this from having done it. If you try and get through the kind of glucose withdrawal, I'll call that, I don't know if that's an actual term or not. But if you try and do that, along with all the other dietary changes that are going on physically with your food, and try and remove caffeine and alcohol and all these kind of things, then yeah, it's going to be pretty miserable. And so, yeah, I'm going to be calling people towards, removing things one at a time, not all at once. But there are certain things that I do want people to give up right away during the first start of the fast, and those things are caffeine and alcohol, and those two things. Um, you can go 20 days without coffee. If that's your biggest challenge, then that might be where you stop. You might need to do just 20 days of no coffee. If you've never done something like that, that might be your level of challenge. Um, I always try and encourage people to go deeper. But I also, like I said, I also encourage people to have a plan. So if your plan is, I'm just going to go 20 days without coffee. Okay, great. You're probably going to spend more years on the world, on the planet. You know, we don't know that. God could take us all away, before I'm done with this broadcast. Please do. Kidding. Not really, but you get what I'm saying, though. That we're never guaranteed. But as we do continue with life, it's good to know that there'll be other opportunities. If life continues presenting itself, you can continue challenging yourself. If life continues, you can continue challenging yourself. So if your challenge for this Lent period, for example, is to just give up coffee, then just give up coffee. That's your first level. But don't stay there, is what I'm saying. So don't just give up coffee and do that for the rest of your life just for 40 days and call that good. That's that just becomes religious. And God's not really interested in religious stuff. If you read the book of Isaiah, for example, you find that God just really doesn't like meetings. He's like everybody else. He doesn't like meetings. You know, He's like meetings for meetings, meetings, meetings. Like, no, uh, I want relationship. It's like God saying, I didn't create you to, you know, come in on a Sunday morning and say these things and do these things and then go home and continue life as if nothing happened. That's not what I want. I want a relationship. So keep that in mind when it comes to fasting, whatever your level is. I don't want you to go, too far past it, but I want you to challenge it. And so if it's, alcohol and coffee that you're giving up, okay, that's great. What else could you challenge yourself with, for do you think you could go further? Answer is yes. You can always go further, but what areas would you want to challenge yourself with? Um, and it may be that I'm seeing a goose egg up top here of people viewing it live today. Uh, Whatever your level is of behavior, food, whatever, it's important to do that, be consistent with it for the period of time you have, but challenge yourself to go further. And that's what the food part of this actually is. And so, what I challenge people to do is to then give up things like meat. That's lower index numbers. They're less of that response, and focus in on. I keep those, and I keep the other ones like so you're whittling down to the point where you're at pretty much zero. That's what we're going to be doing. We're going to get to the point of zero. So you want to be taking your food plan, and that's the and so the next steps with that it's hard to know what the translation really entails. A lot of times this happens with things in the Bible that happen for many, many days. But there was just an assumption made that people knew what they were talking about. So this is a challenge sometimes. You have to dig into the context. But in our modern world, the best way I can define it for people is to say that just taking in foods that only have one ingredient is something that is the best way to do it, or that Daniel fast food keeps it simple, keeps it so I don't have to worry about what's in it because what's in it is on time. So if I make a salad, I have a bunch of single ingredient things that I've been putting in there, but it's not like is this a is this a gluten-free zucchini? Or I don't have questions like that. It's a zucchini. I'm cutting it up, you know, and organic makes sense in a fast, but it's not required. It's not something your body's going to be able to. It's got to be handling a lot. So the reason I do recommend organic, especially when we get to the juicing part, which is the next phase, um, because your system is going to be processing. It's already going to be processing fat for food, fat for energy, and so it's going to be in a state of ketosis, and so your liver is going to be processing ketones and creating that system. So we want to give it the best chance of success as possible, and so we want to limit the amount of uh, other ingredients. Let's say, so going organic does actually make a lot of sense in my mind. Again, not a I don't know what that even called. Is that dietitian? I'm not sure. Whatever professional, I am not. But in my experience, there's been a marked difference when that's my only intake. I can feel a very slight difference, but it's a bigger result on. I can see it on the scale. Actually, it's kind of funny that I've been able to do that enough times in both ways. I have a very scientific mind sometimes. I like to experiment, and I usually like to experiment on myself, but this is the way that goes sometimes. But yeah, so single ingredient foods, and then from there, we're gonna try and taper down even further. But this time we're doing so not necessarily as in terms of uh, glycemic response or anything on calorie intake, or not. That's not our concern. We're more getting the body ready to do water only. And so what we're doing is we're taking out some of the insoluble fiber. And so the best way I've found to do that is to at that point be only taking in juice. And it's fine to start with juices that have fruit in it, but I do find that tapering even that down and saying, getting to the point where it's only vegetables. And so like an entire like 32-ounce thing of juice would probably only have about 100 calories in there, for example. Largely, leafy green juices that would do that. And so um, that, by the way, juicing is kind of awesome. It can be miserable if you do it for a long period of time, but the benefits are fantastic. I mean, there's been some really big leaps forward in my health that have happened with that. I mean, I'm not perfect today. Don't take me as some YouTube sensation. Like, I mean, although I do have a goal written down of becoming, Fabio meets Ryan Reynolds hot, but one step at a time. One step at a time. But having juice is really kind of great. You're getting a huge influx of, vitamins and minerals and things like that that are normally there, but you'd have to just eat so much of that your body would just be overwhelmed with just processing the fibers, and so you're not really going to be able to physically take in that much of the nutrients. And so fasting is kind of like a uh, hyper kind of starting that cleansing and repair of the body. Um, I personally find that having that influx of pure, minerals, vitamins, whatever is in that magic that's in there. It's like, somebody told me, I can't remember what the phrase was. It was like, well, that's probably not the best analogy. They were saying it was like freebasing Mother Nature, but um, yeah. So it's maybe not the best analogy for in our context, but the point is that you are hyper concentrating, the things that God has created and then put in front of us and said, eat that. Um, yeah, you're hyper concentrating that, and you're giving that to your body. Now, the reason I do that style of juice right before doing 3 days of water only, or whatever period of water only. Me personally, I've done fasts, like I said, with varying degrees of water only, up to 14 days. When I did the 14-day, it was a 21-day process, 22-day actually, technically, because I did some additional tapering down. But that was important to have 14 days of water only in a 21-day period, a 22-day period, because it allows the body to be adjusting and successful in that way. So there's that. But so getting to the point of water only, doing water only for 3 days, and I try to be strategic about placing where that happens. It's a little tough to do, especially on a 40-day period. The math doesn't work out well. But generally speaking, uh, the idea here is that if you start on a Wednesday, as Lent typically does, then by the first Saturday, sorry, the second Saturday, which is, uh, this is being recorded Thursday, February 25th, and so on the 27th is when we'll start the actual period of food fasting. And so, yeah, that becomes that level of challenge, right? So that's that level of challenge, and then we spend the um, I believe it's my math here, 14 days. Yes, 14 days of tapering down, and then the 3 days of water only would start on a Saturday. Well, the reason this is important is because when you start doing something like water only, actually, when you start the juice part of it, that is when your energy level does start to to drop below what you've ever experienced before in most cases, and it can be a little scary, but this is the body learning to process your stored fats, and it is reprogramming. My friend, Kevin Davis and I talked about this, a while back, but it's very much your body's learning to stop relying on the junk you've been feeding it in a lot of cases, and in my case, sure. But even still, it still has to learn, even if it's just good things you're feeding it, like vegetables and things like that. There are vegetables that have a much higher amount of carbohydrates and much higher glycemic responses, for example. And so it is possible. Yeah, it is possible to get fat on vegetables. Cows do it all the time. So, and well, and corn is corn is corn. Yeah, it's the reason we fatten up our animals with corn, right? Uh, so there are things that you can that are assumed to be good and assumed to be vegetables that are much more starchy. But so so you can actually gain weight on a fast, believe it or not. If you are into ketosis all the time and bring yourself out of that for a fast and go into like vegetables, you can actually gain weight. It's crazy, but it's true. Uh, change up the game, change up what your body's used to and adjusted to, and usually that's the response is to store, you know, extra. So But similar with that is in this kind of response with that some people call it the keto flu. It's like when your body is shifting into ketosis and it's not sure. It's not ready for that. And so it is um, especially to that level of extreme. There's varying levels of ketosis. I'm technically in ketosis right now. Not in a heavy ketosis. I'm not like full on keto or anything like that, but I am in a state where and I'm burning calories as fat, and on purpose. It's not just by accident. But another story, another day. But when you go into a period of having water only, obviously you're not going to have any nutrients of any kind. No minerals, nothing like that. Which, by the way, is why I always suggest consulting with a doctor, because there are certain medications that you just will damage you if you don't have food in your system, for example, or they might affect the way the liver does its thing to do water only. There are things that if we're putting extra into our body that would be bad, and some medications that if you stop taking them for a length of time, you know, could do some damage or whatever. I don't know. I don't know these things fully. That's why I always want to consult with people that do know and have studied this. Um, and again, some doctors will just pretty much just say any change is bad, don't do it. Okay, but at least you've consulted that. You can probably figure out some other ways to challenge yourself during a period of fasting. But and so just like I said, challenge them on that and say, okay, what can I do? What should I do? And there's levels of difficulty. But again, with the water only, at that point, your body is living off of whatever you've given it to that point. And so by setting yourself up with a bunch of vegetables and vegetable juice, you've given it some material to work with. Now, over a 3-day period of water only, I can't say there's a lot of medical research that says this happens. There is a lot of medical research to say that over about 10 days, you start to see the body repairing itself, and you start to see the body. It's a weird experience, actually. It can be daunting, actually, where you start to have pains in certain areas that you haven't had pains in years. For me, I have a leg that is well, it's got lots of hardware in there. Let's put it that way. And during a water only period, after about 4 or 5 days, I start to feel kind of a burning sensation there. But uh, again, let's put up the disclaimer. I don't want to claim this as something that's going to be true for everybody. Results are going to vary, but what I've found is that um, in those periods, after those periods of fasting, that my leg has hurt less afterwards, and progressively so. Same with my back. I have a degenerative disc disease, right? It's eventually it's going to give out completely, I'm pretty sure, but through chiropractic and things like doing these fasts, I haven't been dealing with anywhere near the back pain that I used to. And so, there's an element there that I have full belief that that obedience comes with a healing. And so there is a fasting for healing. We saw the Apostle Paul do this right before he became Paul. When Saul was struck blind, he refused to eat. It wasn't that he couldn't eat; he refused. And so you see some patterns like that in the that kind of indicate that okay, there was an awareness in that culture that if I'm either doing something bad or I need to heal, that this is what needs to happen. So our bodies, once we get all the stuff out of the way, it starts to heal itself. Now, how in the world the body's able to do healing when all you're taking in is water is a nothing short of a miracle, which is why I love that. But again, just diving right into that, probably a mistake. You want to taper in and then taper back out. And so that after that 3 days of water, that's what we start doing as we go back to the simple juices, right? The very, no sugary stuff in there, just basically just the same vegetables that were the last thing you had. And then we're basically tapering back up to normal food. There's a couple reasons to do this. One, not giving the body the shock of the of being back, right? There's another mistake that people make. I'm done with my suffering. I can now eat whatever I want, and so they go out and just have a bunch of rich foods after a period of fasting, and very quickly find themselves miserable. And some people have actually, ended up in the hospital doing this. And I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to experience that. And so I recommend a tapering up, back up into that. If if you're doing a deeper level of fasting, that there is a element of my recommendation was that there's varying levels of fasting that they can go through at the same time. Um, if you are doing water only for like 14 days, for example, then your mouth will hurt if you try and take in solid foods too rapidly. You need to kind of retrain it and get the palate of the top of your mouth, for example, ready to process foods again. And so being very strategic with what you introduce after having water only is very important. And so I tend to adjust the tapering slightly just based on that. But basically, what we're doing is saying juices for first, and then soft vegetables and uh, well, fruits that we mistake as vegetables. Like, yeah, like avocados, for example, things like that are very soft, don't have a heavy uh, glycemic index or anything like that, and kind of can help all these parts of the body transition. Food's going to taste really weird when you come off of a water only fast, and so it's just something to be prepared for, something to be ready for. But tapering yourself back up and to handle that point where you can get back to doing meat the day after a fast, for example, is very important. uh, but the final bits of the fasting process that I guide people to, there's a final 10 days you might have noticed. So we've only talked about 30 days of 40 so far. And this is something new. This is something in response to something I've realized over the last, 3 or 4 periods of fasting that I've done, is that I need to give myself time to start taking action and to start getting revelations. What I'm saying about that from a spiritual standpoint is that the the times of fasting, I don't always get answers. In fact, I found I rarely get answers. And it can be frustrating. It's like, God, why am I doing this? You're not talking to me. I've had this conversation during a fast. I have a journal entry from a fasting period that I did where I was just so frustrated that I wasn't hearing anything from God. And so I left. I stopped the process, and I had physically gone somewhere where there was no utilities of any kind. Kind of back to my roots, I guess you could say. And yeah, I was fasting there. I was water only. All I brought with me was water to this place in the middle of nowhere, right? Um, and I left because God wasn't talking to me in that extreme. I'm such a big baby. But I was like, if you're not gonna talk to me, I'm not gonna go through this, right? That's the way it felt, you know. And so I did, and it wasn't. Yeah, yeah. I got the message from a friend on Facebook saying, I don't know if you're even gonna get this, but I feel God saying that you're gonna feel like it's over and it's not, and you need to go back." I was like, "What? Okay, that's pretty intense." And so I did. I went back, and there were some additional revelations that came during that period, but it wasn't until I got home. It wasn't until after the fast that actually the revelations came. And it was actually kinda cool because, one of the things that I'd written down that was just kinda confusing is that I wrote down, "God says stop going it alone." And I was like, "Okay, that's interesting, that okay." So, I was thinking in terms of, like, I think I was thinking about starting a podcast at that point. I was like, "Okay, that makes sense." You don't want it to be all about you and just be, prideful or whatever, and so bring other people into the process, get it, okay, don't go it alone. Okay, cool. So I get home and my wife reveals to me that she's heard partnership as the word, and there was some, interpretation there, but when she heard the way I had described what I'd learned, and we put that together, we found out that, oh yeah, this is really all about not going it alone in my business in general. Like this is not healthy. And there's been blessings in obedient in the times I've obeyed that, and not blessings when I've chosen to squirrel out and not do that. But regardless, those 10 days are ready to accept instructions. You've done the prayers, you've done all the fasting period. Now you're back to full energy, and you're taking with you the discipline. You're taking with you all that prayer that you've been doing in fasting, and carrying that forward, sometimes for the first time. And that's when we start getting answers. That's when the clarity comes. And so I want people to give themselves the 10 days of focus on that. And so it's just like, the food part of it may be over, but the focus is just beginning, kind of thing. And so we take 10 days to hone in on this. Now, with the process I'm currently walking through, and what I felt called to do, because it's a very unusual calling, I've got to admit, and one I don't feel equipped for, by the way, is to call people that are interested in expanding into a business area, or having a side gig kind of a thing. Um, and that is who I'm serving with this first book. This first period of fasting is specifically around those that want to become entrepreneurs, or some that are entrepreneurs already, and finding themselves lost with no direction, that sort of thing. And so there's a structure to that 10 days that I'm guiding people towards, that are focused around that, around saying, okay, let's live in what money is. Let's live in what God considers work, and what is work, and how can we serve, and how can we serve in such ways that actually are not only significant, but actually support our family as well. And so how can we exchange value, basically, is what that looks like. And so we're not doing everything as a ministry or as a charity. We're trying to exchange our value at such a high level that we can also do charity, that we can do more of that work. We have more time, more income to be able to pour into the kingdom, instead of just, assuming that our little, 10% is enough. Trust me, living in abundance, um, which has usually come after these times of obedience and a fast, has dramatically increased what we can do. And it's a wonderful feeling to know that there's things we can do that weren't possible when it was just having a single wage. So things like that. So it's really walking through that, and then on the final days of that, I actually do walk people through some foundational things that I've found when it comes to starting a business that are very important. Um, but at that point, it's really just kind of choose your own adventure after that. And so I'm actually working on a network of people, um, doing something super brave, and I'm actually going to be organizing a live event to walk people through this business creation process. And so yeah, if I can make this happen, if God pushes me, then it'll be in about a month and a half that we'll be doing this live event. So watch this space, I guess, for that. But it has a long way to go, it feels like. But at the same time, the stuff just kind of flows out of me. Obviously, I've been talking for an hour now, and it just kind of just flows right out. So I hope this has been useful for you, and I do hope you'll join us. Like I said, I ill prepared with the link on the screen or in the description there, but I'll try and remember to put something in the comments to guide you through what our process is. Just a mailing list right now. We're working on, actually, right now it's not a we, it's a me. Uh, Way to get this information out so that you can catch up. It's not too late. It's never too late. That's the thing about this, is it's never too late to start some level of process. So even if you are joining us, a week into our food fast, that's absolutely fine. But I do encourage you to help me with this book process. What's happening is we are going through a chapter a day. So I write the chapter and I send it out. I've been in a bad habit lately of writing the chapter at about 10, 11 at night and sending it out at midnight. But nonetheless, that's the process. Is every day there's a new chapter that comes out, and so you can read through that and give me feedback, but hopefully be blessed by it. That's the whole point. And so that's fully available to you. That the team of people that are helping me with this, my intention is to figure out some way to get them a physical copy of this, either at cost, or maybe we can figure out some sort of a way to get people these physical copies as well. But that is the intention, is to publish as a physical journal that people walk through. Um, my personal goal is to uh, try and get to the point of fasting 4 times a year. Now, it may not be a full 40 days every time I do this, but that is kind of the process of having that quarterly review, and kind of refocusing myself, you know, reapproaching the throne. It's like, okay, am I still on the right track? Do I need to change anything? Those kind of things are important. So that's going to be kind of in the next phases of this, I'm sure, is how to fast for that purpose. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I've still got what 31 chapters to write. So one step at a time. But I do invite you to be part of that beta readers group, that you can give me feedback and kind of see this before the rest of the world. It's kind of cool. So, and again, it's free to join. It's just a link that just takes you to a mailing list. Is really the gist of it right now. So I mail out the chapters, and then there'll just be access to the archives of the other chapters. So if that's been useful to you in some way, I hope it's been a blessing. And if not, I hope it was just enjoyable for you to hear me talk for an hour, to hear the soothing voices of I'm kidding. But it has been great to be with you, and I do hope that in all you're doing out there, that you are embracing the concept of leaving it better than you found it, and that there is I'm not going to get too philosophical. I'm just going to sign off. I love you guys. Thanks for being with me.